Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's symposium. I'm Gregory Burke, Director of the Power Plant, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the event today. Now, I'm reading off some notes from last night. The printer broke down, so any housekeeping issues or any thank yous I leave out, I'll try and make up for it during the course of the day. So, for those of you who were at the keynote lecture last night, I'm sure you'll agree it was a very memorable lecture by Simon Critchley with a response by Ian Balfour, and set a very powerful context for today's symposium, We, Ourselves and Us. The symposium combines perspectives from artists, philosophers and curators and considers current ideas and re-conceptualizations of communities and collectivity. The speakers take their cue from Nina Möntmann's guest-curated exhibition, currently on view at the Power Plant, If We Can't Get It Together, to trace the creation of temporary social formations. Appropriately enough for a symposium on themes of community, we would like to acknowledge our local partners that have been intimately involved in We, Ourselves and Us from the start. The symposium was organised by the Power Plant in association with the journal Public and with the collaboration of the Goethe Institute Toronto. Now, a special issue of Public arising from the exhibition and symposium and edited by Nina Möntmann will be published later this year. I want to warmly recognise Nina and the staff of the Power Plant, headed up by Senior Curator Helena Reckett and Assistant Curator of Public Programs John Davies, and to acknowledge our funding partners, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, the Toronto Arts Council, and to acknowledge that our public programs are generously supported by primary education sponsor CIBC Wood Gundy. The Canada Council has also funded this symposium specifically. Now, as I mentioned last night, our scheduled speaker, Carlos Basualdo, informed us yesterday morning that he cannot participate in the symposium due to unexpected business in Philadelphia. As this was a last-minute cancellation, he'll be replaced by our own Assistant Curator of Public Programs, John Davies. And so the first session this morning will feature Emily Roysdon and Nina Möntmann and will be chaired by Simon Critchley. Now, just a few things about this evening. During the course of the day, the galleries are open at noon, and of course you can see the exhibition If We Can't Get It Together, plus exhibitions by Emily Duke and Cooper Battersby and Swedish artist Golden plus Seneby. And for those here last night, you might have noted that Simon Critchley mentioned Batai's headless community Agafale, and I just wanted to mention that the second instalment of Golden plus Seneby's film as part of their exhibition Looking for Headless actually premieres today. And we also have a one-day book sale that's with some stunning reductions on catalogues, and your admission into the galleries is free with your ticket. And of course we have a drinks reception starting at 6, from 6 to 7 over at the Power Plant. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague from Public Magazine, Claire Christie, to make a few remarks. Welcome, Claire.
Good morning, everyone. For those who were here last night, welcome back. And for those who sadly missed last night's terrific event, welcome. Public is very pleased to have had the opportunity to work with, in association with the Power Plant and with the collaboration of the Goethe Institute in presenting the symposium. It's been a distinct pleasure working with the team at the Power Plant, and conspicuous thanks must go to Greg Burke, Helena Reckett, John Davies, and Daryl Bank. We look forward to collaborations in the future. The Public Access Collective has, since 1986, through the mounting of public projects and through the publication of the journal Public, pursued a mandate to investigate ideas, theories, and practices of art and culture within the urban context. Our current issue, Public 37 Public, with a question mark, an anniversary issue celebrating 20 years of critical thinking and creative engagement with the notion of the public, features a collection of essays and artist projects that interrogates just what that means in a current context. I invite you also to watch for the companion anniversary issue due out this spring entitled Public Projects for a Small World, co-edited by Gregory Burke and Christine Davis. And as Greg remarked, a forthcoming issue of Public will also feature some material from the Symposium and the exhibition under the guest editorial direction of Nina Möntmann. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Nina Möntmann. Nina is the guest curator of If We Can't Get It Together. She is professor and head of the Department of Art Theory and the History of Ideas at the Royal University College of Fine Arts in Stockholm. From 2003 to 2006, she was curator of the Nordic Institute for Contemporary Art in Helsinki, curated the Pavilion of the Republic of Armenia at the 52nd Biennale of Venice in 2007, and was curatorial advisor for Manifesta 7 last year. She is a correspondent for Artforum and contributes to Le Monde Diplomatique, Parachute, Metropolis M, Frieze, and others. Möntmann is editor of Art and Its Institutions from 2006, and co-editor of Manifesta 7 Companion Reader and Mapping a City from 2005. Please join me in welcoming Nina Möntmann.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to the symposium today, We Ourselves and Us. First, I would like to thank very much Gregory Burke and Helena Rackett for inviting me to curate the exhibition, If We Can't Get It Together, Artists Rethinking the Malfunction of Communities, here at the power plant. It was an amazing experience for me to work with this fantastic team at the power plant on this show, which serves as a backdrop for our symposium today. I would also like to thank the Goethe Institute, Sonja Grigoszewski and Jutta Brendemühl, for their supportive collaboration in both the exhibition and the symposium. I'm very happy that also two of the artists in the show, Emily Roysdon and Louis Jacob, are among the speakers today and will provide us with a deeper insight into their work and its contexts. Maria Lind, curator and currently director of the graduate program at CCS Bard College. Sarah Linama, researcher and member of the collective Public Access. And John Davis, assistant curator at the power plant, will present a range of different collective and participatory approaches in both artistic and curatorial work, while I myself will try to discuss the topic of the exhibition in a wider field of current societal developments. Contributions to the symposium, alongside commissioned texts by other authors like Nikos Papastagiadis and Brian Holmes, will be published, as you heard, in the magazine Public later in 2009. I'm looking much forward to working with the Public team on our special issue on communities. But now I wish you, yourselves and you, all an inspiring day here at the symposium. Thank you very much.
Nina Möntmann going to give the first talk. I'm confused with the order of things, but Nina is over to you. Yeah, and then Emily. All right, so Nina Möntmann.
That's a great choreography. Thank you very much. That's so good. If we can't get it together, artists rethinking the malfunction of communities. The title of the exhibition, which is accompanied by our symposium today, is relating to the idea of the social in contemporary art. Planning this exhibition for the power plant, my main interest was to initiate a discussion on the political moment of social formations and to reevaluate the potential of forming a common agency. The exhibition explores ideas of communities, collectives, and collaboration in art as well as in a wider societal field. The position of an artist, in particular, is always implying decisions on individuality and collectivity, Whether belonging to an artist community, which is mostly locally defined, or collaborating within collective or participatory structures, versus the urge to stand out as an individual. Louis Jacobs' work touches upon exactly these questions of artist community versus the individual art star, but we will hear about that a little bit later from Louis himself. Artists are exploring the idea of social formations, be it through direct cooperations in collective and participatory artworks, or in broaching the issue of communities and other social groups that are defined by a common interest, questioning a national, ethnic, or religious framework, or subcultural cultural communities. Therefore, artists are not only providing images of changes in these areas, they're also participating in new forms of collective work and are creating actual, experimental, or even utopian models for a coming community as it is defined by Giorgio Agamben. Thinking about notions of community is presuming a relational conception of self. Emmanuel Levinas wrote that human subjects come into being only in relation to the other. This means that singularities may gain their subjectivity only by facing the other or the multiplicity of others. Before one can construct any immanent selfhood, one has already been called into question by the existence of others. Every subject inhabits and acts within an always changing cluster of communities. Many of them are only temporary, some are constant. Many are self-chosen, like specific interest groups or hobbies, friends, parties. Others rather imposed on you, like nationality or the family you're born in. Some you're aware of, others not. But the relational concept of self, the relational conception of self, also refers to what David Harvey called the porosity in relation to the world of socio-ecological change, which tempers many theories of individual rights, legal status, and the like. In this sense, the social construction of the self includes also relations to aspects of political and economic realities. Therefore, examining notions of communities always also implies to insist on the personal as political. If we start to describe further what a community could be, we are facing a lot of questions and problems having to do with the malfunction of communities. What defines a community? Certain qualities, common interests, a shared location. What do we expect from being part of a community? Which communities are freely chosen or rather imposed on you? Who's in and who's out? A common definition of community would refer to the sharing of specific qualities as a precondition of belonging to a community, hereby approving the central role of identity issues in constituting a sense of belonging in essentialist terms, like, for example, being Swedish, Canadian, or any other nationality, belonging to a specific ethnic group, or gender and sexual orientation. It also means local or territorial attachments as responsible for defining a community, like part of a specific neighborhood, living in the same place, area, or country, or convictions and dedications, like being member of a certain party, religion, or interest group. This leads to a definition of a social group through exclusion, which acknowledges actual or ideological borders that separate a community from its outside, believers from non-believers, this nationality from the other nationality. Several authors pointed out the risks of these approaches, which lie in an automatical addition and artificial interconnection of several different identity issues, like, for example, a good American is believing in God, or even more dangerous, a member of a certain national, ethnic, or religious community automatically calls outsiders his enemies. Fascism can, of course, be called the worst outcome of an ideology that is rooted in the celebration of a constructed sameness that can only survive in the destruction of the other. In the light of the potentially fascist moment of essentialist and exclusive ideas of belonging, the complete rejection of certain qualities as a unifying element of a community could seem to be the only way out, the only way to avoid the emergence of a fascist movement. We find models for this rejection in Jean-Luc Nancy's inoperative community or Maurice Blanchot's unavowable community, which is corresponding to what Bataille called, I think Simon was referring to Bataille yesterday as well, which is corresponding to what Bataille called a negative community, the community of those who have no community. All these approaches have recently been described by Canadian linguist Milo Sweetler as referring to dismembered communities. Dismembered communities. I like this term because it implies that the notion of membership, which always calls for certain qualities that have to be brought in, besides a testimonial, a dedication, or agreement, this notion of membership has to be questioned in favor of a completely unconditional community. The authors I mentioned take question against communal identities that replace singularities and put forward an argumentation in favor of anti-essentialist communities, of singularities that only require a being in the world as their only precondition. Nancy, for example, speaks of community as a relational social organization constituted not by the fact of belonging, but by the coexistence of singularity and shared experience. Nancy proclaims the community to be a political project and perceives its permanent struggle against immanent power as a central quality. But since these theories are completely remote from any practicability or implementation in this world, one can only find in them a proof that fascism can always happen in this world. Egla Budvitite, one artist in the show If We Can't Get It Together, has in her video Secta set up a utopian narrative of a secret open source community that functions essentially like the inoperative or negative community we find in Nancy, Blanchot, or Bataille. A group of people who are only connected by strange rituals they perform in public space, like licking fruit they find on the market, shaving their legs in public, hanging on trees, always smiling. They form an unconditional community which doesn't follow any aim. They're also not working and they are not manipulable. They're inoperative, since their activities are ungraspable, undefined, and open source. They're good for nothing, and this is the only freedom that can be reached in social communities. Listening to the voiceover in Hegwe Young's video, Squandering Negative Spaces, which is the central part of her installation, Domestics of Community. We'll see here a couple of images in that. In this video, we find more abstract and poetic correspondences and repercussions of the writings mainly by Blanchot and Bataille. The camera wanders through rainy streets and places in Brazil, while the voice-over narration, spoken by a stranger to the place, poetically describes her search for a home in a foreign place and the feeling of loneliness. I'm quoting, "In how many places have I walked the streets, only to familiarize them? How many streets have I gone to without resistance for no particular reason? To tame myself in the world of the others, or perhaps to assimilate myself? This is a very lonely process of self-colonization. However, one cannot abandon the loneliness, isolation, and pain generated when one makes the foreign land a homeland, when one makes oneself an outsider, an insider, when one simply let one's root thoughts become tame. This lonely search for home and belonging is questioning circumstances like place, time, and language, and their ability to form a community. But with what could they be replaced? Following Young's Lonely Traveler, Paul Virilio's notion of the multiple solitude comes to mind. A multiple solitude, This also applies to the virtual community of media users, like people watching a TV show. Hassan Khan, another artist in the exhibition, took a screenshot with his mobile phone of a quiz show presenter in the moment when she's raising her hands with a gesture that indicates the number 10. She can be recognized as a TV presenter by her microphone in her cleavage, and we can only assume that she's promising the winner a prize of 10,000 euro. The image was taken in Germany. In the process of making a drawing of the photo, which was then used as a model for an etching, before this again was printed on vinyl, Khan deprived the figure of the context of the quiz show. The quiz question that was to be seen on the screen, the stage setting, and the phone numbers that were shown, all taken away by Khan in this process of transforming the screenshot into the print on vinyl. Hereby, the shallow one-way communication of this TV presenter who is trying to animate those people to call, the TV audience to call these very expensive phone numbers in terms of to raise this money then they later on will give away, plus a profit, of course. So this shallow one-way communication with an invisible audience is turning into an enigmatic moment of self-exposure. While we have just seen examples of reflection on community in art, other artists in the show also explore the mechanisms and dynamics of other social formations, meaning a collective, like Emily Roysdon, Hadley and Maxwell, or Kaiser Dahlberg. In order to fathom their respective functionality and potential, it can make sense to try to differentiate between a community and a collective. But what is the difference of a community and a collective? One could roughly say that community is about being and belonging, while a collective is about doing. A collective can be defined by a shared working process, which is mostly following a certain aim, like to produce something, to split the tasks of a bigger project or process, or to create a common agency. In the beginning of all collective processes stands the question, what does being part of a collective add to, or rather take away from the subjectivity of the individual? Is it desirable at all? Finally, what is an artist's interest in being part of or in portraying a collective working process? Brian Holmes' conclusive argumentation indicates that the origin of all collective artwork lies in political resistance. Therefore, creating and working in collective structures in art basically implies merging artistic production with social movement. Models and ideas for both kinds of social formations, a community and a collective, we find in various art projects as well as in curatorial approaches that employ collaboration as a foundational activity, but also in political activism and other societal movements. I think Carlos Basualdo's notion, whom we unfortunately don't have here today, I think Carlos Basualdo's notion of the experimental community is exceeding those delimiting criteria of defining a community here and a collective there, and is trying to merge the elements of being and doing, of a community and a collective. In their article about the bringing together of communities in recent contemporary art projects, Carlos Basualdo and Renato Ladaga pose a key question concerning respect for and encouragement of difference in the public realm. They write, how can diverse local intentions be brought together on behalf of united actions that acknowledge their diversity as well as their shared values? The answer to this question lies in the concept of experimental communities, which puts the emphasis on both the temporary and the model-like character of these endeavors, bringing together individuals with different knowledge and experience in a collaborative process. These social imaginations of artists are created at a time when various state-run forms of social organization and welfare systems are collapsing. In the context of an ever-declining welfare state in Western European countries, the decreasing availability of social services in North America, and the loss of the state-run organization of social life in Eastern Europe, the nation and its declining power of defining a community and its narrative, political developments that influence the conception and reality of our social lives. The experiences of the individual are formed by the fact that existential responsibilities like healthcare, minimal maintenance, or old age pension are thrown back more and more onto the individual. This pressure of personal responsibility leads to question the relation of individual and community. What to expect from your community? Is your community taking care of you? But also new social formations have been enabled and generated by the diverse mechanisms of globalization, like the effect of communication technology that not only connects individuals, but also creates social groups and collective production, like, for example, Wikipedia or open source operating systems as Linux. Here we find the empowerment of the individual through participation in public action, or global migration, which opens up a wide field since it can mean both a freely chosen lifestyle or enforced exile for people. Having a look at recent post-national conflicts, like for example in former Yugoslavia, one can say that new nationalisms are emerging from the region, what could be described with Arjun Appadurai's notion of minority narcissism. Within the destructive situation of resurgent nationalist sentiments, assuming an anti-nationalistic position is a necessary precondition for any fundamental agreement. In current art projects, the challenge is to create a temporary model situation of community, one that can be experimental, provisional, informal, and maybe prototypical. The virtue of these communities, as compared with essentialist definitions of assumed fixed identities, lies in an openness of process that is based on the temporary shared interests of the participants or simply their physical being in the world. This is a radical reconceptualization of community that refuses to function as an easily manipulated mass united by a common identity. Instead, it implies the revolutionary potential of collective resistance. The exhibition, If We Can't Get It Together, shows the approaches of artists who are exposing malfunctions of existing historic and contemporary communities, providing concepts and images of new communities and their potential for collective agency. Analytically or imaginary, they are questioning those relational concepts of self, participating in collective practice or creating images and narratives of the social. By this, they are all becoming involved in the production of social knowledge. Thank you very much.
So let me introduce Nina after the talk. Let me reverse the normal procedure, and it's going to be over to Emily now. That was fascinating. I just want to say also the exhibition, if you've not seen the exhibition, is extremely interesting, and the idea of a transient community, the idea of the sort of art institution as the space where something like a transient concrete utopia can take place is compelling. Also raises all sorts of questions about why it is in that space that it can happen, and does that relate to the space outside. Before turning to Emily, just a word. I'm just thinking, listening to what Nina was saying. I mean, because there's a problematic here, which is fascinating, which is the relationship between singularity and sharing. Right? In many ways, the problem of community is a problem of, on the one hand, singularity, the singularities out there, and what we have in common, and this sort of, in the literature that Nina was referring to, this is a constant theme. I mean, Nancy in La Communauté des œuvres has this formula for community that it takes from Bataille, which is toi et tout autre que moi, right? Which is composed of two elements, toi et moi, you and I. That's a moment of sharing, and toi et tout autre, you are completely other than me. So the formula for community is both this idea of sharing, Nancy calls partage, and a moment of singularity. And the difficulty is how those two things can be mapped together. And this is all, and also this relates to what Nina was saying, and maybe what Emily will say too, around the idea of the work. I mean, not the title of Nancy's book, which is translated as inoperative community, is désœuvré, right? I mean, the unworked community. I mean, the problematic here is that there was within, for Bataille, within fascism, fascism was an idea of community as work, a community as a work, as an achievement, based on an idea ultimately of the community as a sort of Gesamtkunstwerk, sort of 19th century idea. So how do we think an idea of community, an anti-fascist notion of community, where there's still an idea of commonality, of sharing? And that means destabilizing the idea of work. And that relates to what I was talking about last night in terms of poverty and the way in which these, again, temporary communities of the mystical anarchists in the medieval period, what the key trope there was poverty, impoverishment, a community that wouldn't consummate itself in a work of the nation, a work of the state. And that also means that the key element in thinking about community is transience, other things which, I mean, this piece upstairs about the secret open source community is fascinating. How do we think about community not in relationship to the visibility of a work, the work of a nation, the work of a people, the work of a state, but in relationship to ideas of secrecy, opacity, and invisibility. Right? Around these ideas, I think a lot of the work is taking shape. Which brings us, of course, to Ecstatic Resistance, which is the title of Emily's paper. Emily claims to come from New York, but we all know that secretly she lives in Sweden, as it seems everybody does these days. And she's got pieces of work up in the exhibition which are fascinating. I urge you to go and see them if you've not seen them already. She's editor and co-founder of the queer feminist journal and artist collective LTTR, which is going to be the topic of her talk today. She's going to be talking in relationship to that. And then after that, we're going to have a discussion, right? Three of us, and open it up. So, Emily.
Thanks for the water. Let me just make some space here. Okay. Oh yeah. Hi everybody. Emily Roysdon. I was born in Maryland. That's where my mom is. So I over-prepared, which I guess sort of has just been what I'm doing recently. And also I sort of find myself wearing many hats, as they say. I'm here as an artist in the exhibition. I'm also going to talk through LTTR, which I'll tell you what that is. It's a group I've been involved with for the past 6 years. And I'm also going to try to address a new idea I've been developing. Sort of been in my mind for the last 2 years, and in the last few months I've decided to take it seriously. And those ideas are developed from all of these artworks and from my experience with LTTR. And then the other thing I can say about the reason that I have 55 slides to show you is that in 30 minutes, is that when talking about LTTR, I find it difficult to represent the group fully, and so I need a lot of visual aids. You need to see how many people are involved in the project, and it's also important to me that all of the contributors to the journal, at least at some point, you see their name. Because LTTR is not 3 of us or the 5 of us eventually who edited the journal, but this entire constituency. So that's sort of the intro. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the strategies and my working in LTTR. I'm going to talk about, I've woven sort of the images of LTTR and my projects together. So I'll show you sort of everyone in LTTR was always working as well in their sort of individual practices. at the same time, and this is the first time I've ever really woven those together, and it's very interesting to see how they affect each other, like what I'm dealing with. And then the other important thing is that a lot of the theorizing I'm doing is through artistic practices, through my own and those of others. There are some places where I know my references should be a little more thorough, but I guess that's this coming year's work. And Simon, you can tell me about that later. So I want to start with two quotes. They're sort of ever present on my desktop. Act so that there's no use in the center. That's Gertrude Stein. And Agamben. Okay, so this is the first project I'm going to show. It's, oh shit, I messed up already. Okay, I'll do that in a minute. Okay, this is this is really, honestly, it's like technically the second project I ever made, but it's sort of the first. And it's a collaboration with the already deceased artist David Wojnarowicz. And I really can't go too deeply into these, but to a lot of the projects. But this was what I was working on when we started LTTR, so it's relevant in that way. Rimbaud made David Wojnarowicz made a mask of Rimbaud's face, and the project was about his identification with him. I then made a mask of David's face and reconceptualized the project about what was the urgency, what would the politics be now, which this was 2001. For example, David had a friend of his shooting heroin. This is testosterone. He also did some work at the piers. It was a lot of cruising sites. And then you see we started LTTR, and the other editors wanted to put this on the cover. This is from my project, the only image that is an exact reproduction of David's, except this is a dildo. So this is the first LTTR. It's a little bit about LTTR. It was Ginger Brooks Takahashi, myself, and Kate Hardy started the project in 2001. It was later joined by Lanka Tattersall and Ulrika Müller. Every issue of LTTR was initiated with an open call, so we would write an invitation, circulate it, and then curate the journal around the submissions that we received. We made 1,000 copies of each journal. They were all lovingly handmade and had a series of artist multiples. And we didn't really deal with money. We sold LTTR for $10 for 4 years, which, you know, that's like a coffee. But we really wanted the people who wanted to read the magazine to be able to afford it. And that was crucial. When we first made it, we thought if, 100 people paid $10, and we've, that's good. And also that we started LTTR to formalize a conversation and to make visible a conversation that was already happening. Certainly, there were already this really vibrant scenes sort of in different cities all over the world, and we wanted to treat these people's artworks as they deserve to be treated and to put them in dialogue with each other. So in a way, it was also building a context for certain kinds of works. Certainly the idea of working in a collective, we wanted to sort of resist this model of becoming a masterful individual artist. We were young, queer feminists in New York City, and we had a lot of energy. And certainly we were aware of these histories that were influencing us, everything from Grand Fury to heresies to ACT UP, and we're very cognizant of this lineage, and we placed ourselves directly within it. And have been in sort of these, intergenerational dialogues. But we've also that whole time been aware of the dramas, of the certain difficulties and confrontations that working in a collective, brings along the way, and then ultimately the decisions you have to make. For me, working in LTTR was always about, I was interested that it was never a protest group. That what we were doing was trying to build the context and trying to build the spaces that we wish existed. And so there's a real It's a different emphasis. It's a different kind of pleasure to create what you want instead of just name what you don't want. It was always about this very physical pleasure of thinking with other people. It's not that we just worked together, we thought together. And that's it's, you know, going to influence my life forever. It's a real pleasure. I hope you all get to do that. And then also for me, it was about labor. Really investing my time and energy in my peers' work as much as I invested it in my own. So sort of just being real honest about how much it is that we are reliant on each other. So again, this is sort of the boring sort of slide I'll show you where at least everybody's name is up there once. I can't represent all of the people who've been involved in the project, but you see their name. So sorry for that. This is a quote from the introduction that I wrote to the first issue. Interestingly, this is throwing this out to Simon, but this is the first time I ever wrote publicly. I also love to write. And my text was called Democracy, Invisibility, and the Dramatic Arts. And it was very much about performance and sort of going behind the curtain about these unseen sort of holes, you know, where we are productive. And those are invisible places. And just sometimes moving into visibility sort of strategically. Yeah. This is just some images from LTTR. These are some early openings. This is the process of making the first journal. We, you know, printed it, letterpressed it ourselves and stuff. Okay, this is a video I made called Social Movement, which was maybe, you know, we started LTTR 2001 or something. This is 2004. And it's sort of retroactively, I'm saying that this is the first of a series, the second of which I've just done last summer in Stockholm. And the series is invested in this expanded field of choreography that speaks as much about social movements and political organizing and collectivity as it does about dance per se. So I really like sort of exploding this idea of choreography to deal with something like these movements and the interrelationships in collectivity and social movements. This video is called Social Movement. It's a direct reference to this sort of idea of producing history. It's very much interested in archiving and the processes of history and memory, what we remember, why we remember it, and it's also sort of a gesture towards the tradition of the Judson dance theater, people like Yvonne Rainer, performance, vernacular sort of movement. Okay, moving right through there, these are some of the images from that project. I get awesome comments about this because very little happens. And some people really, like one person put their hand on my shoulder and said, "You are a very brave woman for showing this work," which I think is hysterical. Other people, one guy was like, "Are you the one that made that video?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "I really didn't like it." He said, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. And I thought, I think that's better. This is the second LTTR. It comes in a big LP sleeve, and it's called Listen, Translate, Record. I forgot to say the first one is called Lesbians to the Rescue. Listen, translate, record. It's an LP sleeve, and it also comes with a CD, everything from pop songs to oral histories, some experimental stuff. And the text is on a poster that folds out. We were interested in experimenting sort of formally with like text, and as if like it's a poster, sort of your eyes can always go to the same spot in an image, and if you would do that, if you would read the same sentence in your bathroom 100 times but never read the whole text, and that sort of development of language in your life. Again, amazing, great people. This is the third issue. It's called Practice More Failure. All these people are in it. With this third issue, with all of the issues, we had these great celebrations that became these release parties, events. We incorporated a lot of performance, and we, thought intellectual performance is also performance, put this alongside dance and all other kinds of things. So we were invited at Art in General by Sofia Hernandez she made a simple invitation at first. This is a work by A.K. Burns. It's called Decorated Soldier. Yeah, this is another one of those spreads. There's Louis up there in the corner. Long time ago. 2003, I think. Anyway, we did 3 weeks of events, at least 3 events a week. I think we had a budget of $200 for all of that work. Everybody was working for free. We had a lot of fun. People flew themselves in from different parts of North America. It was really, really wonderful time. This is Virginia Puff Paint, Will Monroe and Jeremy Lang in that image, your local Toronto. This is a poster for the exhibition, also made by Aisha Burns. There are some beautiful remnants of these posters in New York City. There's this one corner where it's been deteriorating for many, many years, and there's some shards still left on the wall, and I'd love to go look at it. This is Megan Palima, a performance artist in front of the space. Small crowd. Sophia's original invitation was to use this downstairs space for a week, and we ended up using all the floors of the gallery for 3 weeks. Make-out couch. Louis. Work of Louis, Leidy Churchman, Allison Smith, Zyler Jane, Matt Keegan, G.B. Jones, lots of people in that image. We used this downstairs space and paired artists who didn't know each other, but whose work we knew and we thought would have an interesting time together. We put them in there for, I think it was 4 days or something. Louis Jacob was one of them. And the works accumulated. So the first 2 people collaborated in the space for 4 days, and then the next 2 people went in there, and everything stayed. So it just became this sort of giant palimpsest, I guess would be a good word for it. This is from the outside. Clara Leeden, also in there. This is Greg Bordowitz giving a talk about sex and war to an enraptured crowd. Outside, again, Virginia Puff Paint in the window. This is issue 4, Do You Wish to Direct Me? It's taken from a Linda Benglis video. And that glove by Liz Collins, it makes your fingers go like this. Lesbians tend to read. This was a bookmark. I know it is funny, isn't it? This bookmark came in the issue, and then we did these series of events in different cities called radical read-ins, where people would come in public and read together. So we did this at Printed Matter, and then these bookmarks were there, and people would sort of mark passages. So you could then go into the store into the summer months, and you'd see these little bookmarks everywhere, and you could see what people had been inspired by who came before you. Part of the radical read-in was that we also invited people to bring text that had changed their lives. And then we asked them to read it out loud, whether or not it was a sentence or a paragraph or 2 words next to each other. And this is really fun to see this sort of affective version. This is the back of the bookmark. Apparently somebody got that tattoo. That's Anya Hogan Finley drew that. This all people in issue 4. We considered this the subway version of LTTR. It was small enough that you could put it in your bag. So all the other ones had taken some strange shapes. Okay. This is my work that is in the show right now at the power plant. It's called Strategic Form. I was really into this idea that sort of there's a certain loss that accompanies exposure. And so I wanted to think through that idea formally, and I used photography to do that. There's a great, I love Helene C. Sue. There's a great sort of just a fragment of one of her sentences from this book called 3 Steps on the Ladder of Writing, where she says, all of the things that loss brings as it goes away. So it's not so dramatic to think about loss and exposure, but I think it is really a great place to think about the problems of representation, which I'm really interested in. It's one of my investments in doing collective work and in sort of being involved in the worlds that I move through. Always sort of troubling these ideas and images. Yeah, so it's about moments of self-recognition, portraitures of certain kind of possibility. I wanted them to be very isolated, fragmentized building blocks, really. Yeah. Each person took 2 pictures of themselves, one when they felt comfortable and one when they felt like they were about to disintegrate. So I'm just moving through this very quickly. There's some text about it at the show. This is the 5th LTTR, the most recent, but it's of 2006, which is very, becoming history. It's called Positively Nasty. It's a really great theme to work with. There's all people in it. Positively Nasty, we got a lot of porn submissions, really sort of literal and interpretations, but sorry, some of the thing when we were sort of conceptualizing it, we really wanted a certain positivity, like a direct confrontation, and how sort of disgusting it can be if you actually name something. You really force it into a certain kind of visibility. It's almost vulgar sometimes, and that's where we wanted to go. We wanted you to say it, we wanted you to mean it, see what happened. We were asked to do lots of sort of installations in the last few years, and we would do the same thing. We got a piece of plywood, 2 sawhorses, set up a table, reading table, put the journals on it and other interesting books, this text on the wall, which is cardboard, and then we threw an axe into the table and left it. This is a video I made called Living the Sacrifice, which I'll explain to you. It's very easy to understand how it's influenced by my work with LTTR and all the people involved. But Living the Sacrifice, it's about language. It's attempting to articulate what it feels like to be a part of something. And I sometimes think that that's an impossible task, but it's something that I'm really interested in trying to do. So this person, me, I'm speaking in a way that it's like I want you to want to understand, but it's not linear. I offer no narrative about what it is that I've done that I feel is important, but it's a very affective speech, and sometimes I just sort of start to sing and I go no, 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 and then I go you, and it's like, so really it's very rhythmic. It's I wanted, again, to challenge a certain veracity of documentation. Like, this person clearly experienced something, and is that enough to say that something's happening, or what kind of proof do we need? And in a way, I wanted to make a tribute to the many voices that live in one historical body, how we animate the histories that we live with. So it's clear how this is in all my life. This is my most recent project. Stockholm 2008, God bless the Aspis. This is called 4 Screens as Dialogue, Pioneering, Devotional, Familiar, Invasive. It's actually sort of 2 works in one. The title I just gave you is for the screens themselves. They're 4 sort of 10 by 10 foot images. Each photograph is a conceptual representation of language. And then the performance itself was called Work, Why Not? Work, why not? So this is a phrase that came from the audience. I took the language away from the stage and asked the audience to sort of produce a live record of their reaction, sort of with certain prompts that were like, if this image looks familiar, say again. If somebody does something you weren't expecting, say why. And that's when this phrase, work, why not, came out of the audience. I titled it that. That's Clara Leeden. She's an amazing artist, about to jump off that thing, which nobody wanted her to do. Malin Arnell in the foreground is going to catch her. Dean Spade on the right, he's a brilliant trans activist and attorney, academic now. And Emma Hettich, lovely British artist. And Chris Ridselius on the other side. I just recruited him. He has a great attitude and a sense of humor, and he studies like sustainable development in Stockholm. This is one of the shots through the screens. I was experimenting with this kind of, with sort of different styles of direction. Like I really wanted to tell people enough, the performers, I wanted to tell them enough that they were comfortable, but I wanted them to be actively thinking while they were doing the performance. So having to work together, so it was a real balance. So here they're trying to figure out what it is I've asked them to do, how to do it. Yeah, so disrupting conventions of the theater. Yeah, I've also done these other projects sort of with the phrase talk is territorial, very much about the materiality and the physicality of speech embodied and a certain betweenness in speech. This is right after the dance interlude. Okay, now we're at Ecstatic Resistance, which is, I'm really excited about this work. I'm doing it right now. I'm gonna curate a project about this at this space called Grand Arts in Kansas City. They've been really wonderful. And yeah, I've had this thing recently. I said that I love to write, but also sometimes it's like I'll develop a term, but I've never really defined them. This is the first time I'm going to really try and give this idea the attention that I think it deserves and try and define it in a way. So right now, everything's still at list level. Like I haven't, I can tell you, I've sort of grouped it into these series of ideas, but I haven't sort of made my manifesto yet. So I hope you can forgive me. And you know, maybe in a little while, we'll see what this all means. How am I time-wise? Am I embarrassing myself? Okay, cool. Okay, so Ecstatic Resistance, I'm trying to do 3 things at this point. This might change. The first is to develop a positionality of the impossible. I said that the impossible is always political. This is not a naive position. What has been impossible has changed over time, certainly racially, ethnically. All of these ideas of, yeah, these things shift. So I'm interested in directing myself at the idea of the impossible, just like I think with the first LTTR, I was interested in the idea of invisibility. So developing the positionality of the impossible is people who live their lives at the intersection of many, many powers and inhabiting many subjectivities. We know these people exist, but for example, when they try to, access help and funds and all these sorts of services, it's really hard sometimes. So this project definitely has a bit of an activist tint, and I think it's in here, really. So also in the impossible, we think about the limits of respectability, to directly confront what is forbidden. Yeah, and I'm interested in the sort of boundaries of humanness, citizenship, technology. These things all fall within this idea. Number 2 is the possibility of a new imaginary. So this, to me, if Simon maybe last night talked about the original sin, I'm sort of going to go to the primal scene of language. It's, I guess, more psychoanalytic than God-based. So the primal scene of language, which immediately brings up the idea of sexual difference. This is where I think we have a possibility to create a new imaginary. And for me, that's very much about language. Yeah, and also it's crucial is a sort of non-biologically determined attempt. Lots of sort of feminisms and new theories are working this way, but this is the sort of root of this idea. And number 3 is I want to think about the sets of strategies that create ecstatic resistance. It's definitely developed out of a sort of queer and feminist histories, political histories, aesthetic histories. And I want to sort of set myself to see what it is people are doing. So that's the basic idea. I'm going to leave this image up there because it's nice, but I have a bit more to say about this idea. Excuse me. Beautiful poster, isn't it? So in the idea, what do I mean by ecstatic? Okay, so I have a list here. Taking a leap, doing something that is immediately beyond logic and reason. It's just that first step, just go there, you know? Something that exceeds itself. You exceed yourself, you become an other to yourself. Excess, something that is not accumulating in an orderly or prescribed way. You know, we can feel that our boundaries are moving here. I'm like dancing for you. It's the unthinkable and the unspeakable. Ecstatic resistance wants to think about all that is unthinkable and unspeakable in sort of the Eurocentric, phallocentric world order. Disruption of boundaries. Yeah, again, this sort of the mobilizing force of desire. I really think this is going to become very important politically. So the ecstatic moment of creating this shattered individuality. Again, it's sort of this becoming other to self, recognition that you are a conglomerate of parts. And I think there's also a certain engagement with just risk, just simply the word risk is in the idea of the ecstatic for me. And then what do I mean by resistance? Refuse claims of mastery and wholeness. Again, the impossible is always political. This is a resistance. An unstable identity, disruption through bodily affect, pleasure, new ways of being in the world, and speech. These are all locations of resistance ideas. Like I said in the beginning, I'm thinking this idea through practices. So works I'm interested in, they exceed themselves in form. So some things are sort of more form categories and modes of reception and exchange. Okay, we can already see that a lot of stuff is going to fall into this category. But also, I think that with time, I'll really, it'll be interesting. Yeah, and then there's this thing that's actually pulls from this book that Simon also mentioned last night, this Amy Hollywood text called Sensible Ecstasy. But, and she was speaking about bataille. But it says, don't avoid the paradox or solve it, but embrace it and force people to think it in all its contradiction. That, to me, is also ecstatic resistance. The questions that I'm going to try and ask with the project is, what is communication in an ecstatic state? I think it's, you just said it, it's, you said the relationship between singularity and sharing, and in there I just immediately think of communication. A lot of my work is just sort of obsessed with communicating. So what is communication in ecstatic state? I don't want to escape history, this responsibility of history, demands of history, whatever you call it, for the immediacy of experience or pleasure. I'm really interested in mobilizing this sort of ecstatic state, this ecstatic resistance into viable political projects. And so new ways to think about language and the limits of representation. Ability to think outside restrictive oppositions, affecting our understanding of subjectivity in the body and difference, what is forbidden. And I'm interested in the temporality of the ecstatic, the time in which you are open, in which your boundaries have changed, physically, psychically, emotionally, ideologically. This temporality, do we come down? Like, when is it that sort of the action happens? This I haven't gotten into yet, but I think it'll be really interesting. is sort of different than this idea of mysticism, and yes, I did think about this before his talk last night, is that it's a field of influences operating on the body, that it's very unauthorized. There's not this direct relationship to God. And I think about this because the ecstatic and mysticism certainly have a, clear relationship, and so I've been just having to deal with that relationality. Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna skip some of this. I just have 3 projects for other artists that I wanna just quickly say that I think I'm gonna relate to this idea, and I'm really invested in these people's projects. This is Janine Olson, amazing New York artist, did this project called the Greater New York Smudge Cleanse, and in the middle there, classism, heterosexism, imperialism, election anxiety, gentrification, eco-destruction, and greed. So Janine, genius. She built the world's largest smudge stick. You guys know what a smudge stick is? It's like sage, it's in the Native American tradition, and you burn the sage, and it's supposed to cleanse the room of spirits and stuff. So this is the world's largest smudge stick. And she addresses herself to all of these things, and she did the project in 4 different times in New York. This is at the site of a great oil spill in Greenpoint. So she's, smudging it. This is in the West Village, going from the piers, which have, were the site of great things, sort of, sexual and cultural underground of the 70s. She smudged the piers and then walked to Stonewall with this big burning thing through New York City. It was so much fun. This is the day before the U.S. presidential elections, and this is, that's George Washington's, where he signed the, whatever, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, whatever. I was actually one of these people, these smoke dancers. She dressed us up in these costumes, and we had to act like smoke. And she, at each site, each time she did this 4 times again, she had people sort of reading these historical texts that were relevant to the space. This is, in the middle of the financial collapse. That's the New York Stock Exchange. So we were acting like fruits and fairies, like in the middle of the day, right across the street, burning sage, doing tarot readings. It was really amazing. Okay, this is going to be so brief, but I'd also really interested in Ulrika Oettinger in this context. This is a still from Madame X, and this from Freak Orlando. Sharon Hayes' work's very important to me. This DNC, Democratic National Convention, Republican National Convention, she did 2 performances. For the last many years, Sharon, maybe a year and a half, 2 years, she's been working through this idea of love and writing these texts where the person that she is addressing is constantly shifting, and it's not always a person. Sometimes it's really the sort of meta-narrative of history that she's talking to. Sometimes it very much feels like an intimate love letter, as if you start to picture who it is that she's speaking to. Sometimes it's just the idea of the people. But throughout the text, it shifts many times, and you find yourself sort of identifying and disidentifying and moving along with her. She did these performances commissioned by Creative Time, and where people read this letter in unison. People were recruited from the local cities where the conventions were and did these performances. This was when the haters happened to stumble upon her performance. That was not planned. Yeah. It is funny, but I also thought about it in terms of thinking about this idea of reenactment. This is, she's not really reenacting anything. It's an original text, but it's almost as if doing a public protest is a reenactment at this point. Sort of this rehearsal of meaningful text in a public place. But when you have this, there are stakes. There are high stakes. It's not in a warehouse in Brooklyn. And then this again is in the Republican National Convention. Okay, and just very quickly, the work of My Barbarian, incredible Los Angeles performance artist I'll think of in this context. This is from a piece they did called Non-Western, which is amazing. It's really dealing with post-colonial theory and they write these really great texts and perform it, and they write music and it's extremely campy, great outfits and stuff like that. And now they're doing this new work. This is sort of the body of them here: Jade Gordon, Malik Gaines, and Alexandra Segade. So I end there. I thank you for your attention. There's lots of ideas. We can have a discussion.